actually just picking up Anthony Watts from the Heartland Institute, Chicago, Illinois. I'm Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate.
Appreciate you joining the program here today. We're talking a little bit about how the rise of environmentalism, something we've been tracking on this program for about 5 years now, seems to be impacting the energy industry more and more aggressively. It would be the word that I would say in its truest Webster's dictionary sense in terms of impacting the industry. But we'll see what Mr. Watt has to say about that. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Sitting in Northern California where we're about to experience a big cold snap and sub-freezing temperatures. Thank goodness for fossil fuels.
What's going on out? And by the way, Heartland Institute, go ahead and give your organization a little plug if you wouldn't mind. Appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your mind with us. So the least we can do is give you guys a plug for what you guys are doing out there.
We're a think tank that looks into issues related to energy as well as climate. And we are the leading organization for climate skeptics around the world. We put on conferences on climate typically every 1 to 2 years, and we write a number of specialized papers to help legislators understand the issues of climate and the issues of energy.
Before we get into how the rise of environmentalism has impacted the energy industry, you're out in Northern California. Of course, we've got a lot of California blackouts. Has that impacted you out there? Are you following that?
Yes, it has impacted both my home and my business, as well as my cohorts in the area and friends. And a number of people are quite concerned about the future here of California. It seems like it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. The state is talking about taking over PG&E. And, of course, if that happens, it will probably get even worse because, as you know, government doesn't particularly do anything well. And then there's concerns over energy rationing, and blackouts for environmental issues, and all sorts of things. The future of energy in California, at least Northern California right now, where Pacific Gas and Electric serves, is quite uncertain, and a number of people are quite concerned about it. A number of people are actually just picking up stakes and leaving. Companies are leaving. For example, the Bay Area is having companies that are unsure about the energy stability. They're worried about, their server platforms and so forth. They're packing up and moving because they can't go forward with their business due to the instability of the energy situation.
How about those small businesses? And by the way, this is pop quiz for you here. You may or may not be qualified to answer these, but if you're in it, you my guess is you are, because you have eyeballs and observations. Like small business owners, the guys working at coffee shops, that need the Wi-Fi and their Wi-Fi at home. And, we live in such a mobile society. Have you heard those types of, that type of the industry where they rely on, Wi-Fi and public spaces and everything like that? Are they able to sustain themselves in this type of blackouts?
Well, interestingly enough, some businesses have opted to put in their own generation systems. For example, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Red Bluff, California, and the entire town was blacked out except for this one gasoline station at the intersection of Antelope Boulevard and Interstate 5. And they had installed a natural gas-powered automatic generation system, and it was the only gas station open in town, and there was lines backed up for a half a mile to get into this gas station. But some people are basically turning to generation to keep their businesses open, and rightly so. But interestingly enough, while Pacific Gas and Electric was chasing environmental Holy Grail, such as putting in wind power and solar power and so forth, to meet the mandates of AB 32 from 2006, when California said we must go to renewable energy, to stave off the nasty generation of carbon dioxide. Now we've got all these generators all over the place that are polluting more and more frequently during these blackouts. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. Some businesses are just simply closing shop and they're losing money. Others are taking it directly head-on and putting in generation systems. So it's kind of an interesting mix.
It's a good transition into the theme of the conversation, which is the rise of environmentalism, which has brought peer pressure to, social engineering, if you will, which is, we're talking broad, sweeping changes of lifestyle and technology, which are very few and far between in recorded history in the United States. What's being proposed? Talk to me a little bit about your perspective of how the rise of environmentalism has created a peer pressure type environment out there.
Well, it's become kind of I guess the way to describe it is that you're unclean if you're not doing something to save the environment in California. That's how some people look at it. Although Northern California is much more conservative, especially in the interior, while the coast is much more liberal. But there's this pressure constantly that we've got people like Bill McKibben with his 350.org organization has people going to city councils and asking them to declare climate emergencies. For example, in my town of Pico, California, the 350.org people were able to convince the majority of city councilors that they needed to declare a climate emergency. Because the world's going to end in 12 years, according to AOC and other brilliant scholars. So anyway, they declared this climate emergency, but the fact of the matter is that it was nothing more than a feel-good exercise. They're actually doing nothing to meet that issue. They're not acting as if there's an emergency. So there's lots of this shaming going on and peer pressure to try to get people to think differently. The fact of the matter is, though, is that most people, at least in Northern California's interior, aren't buying it. They tolerate these kinds of things, but they don't change their lifestyle associated with it. And that's why the state tries to force things onto people, because they know a lot of people will not change their lifestyle, will not stop driving, will not stop using electricity, and other things that make life today worth living and livable. They're just not going to do that. And that's the problem. The environmentalists are trying to sell a much more crude lifestyle, a less energy-intensive lifestyle, and Americans just aren't having it, at least out here in Northern California.
Why do you think the rush is on, the green rush, if you will, just a ramrod or a... To me, that's why I say aggressive. It's very aggressive to make these changes in 10 years. For example, I've heard multiple people that have very good credentials tell me that, if we don't figure out a new way to make planes fly in 10 years, no planes will fly. And to me, that's borderline insane, kind of ludicrous with today's world. Talk to me about that as far as the timeline, because it does seem that the Chicken Littles, the Y2Kers of the world are really winning the narrative out there.
Well, they might be winning the narrative, but the reality is technology and physics doesn't meet the narrative and can't. The kinds of things that they're suggesting be done, like electric airplanes, for example, are just not feasible. If they were feasible, they would have been done 50 years ago or more. We've taken 100 years to get to where we are in the way that we use energy and the efficiency and so forth. And some of these people think that we have to transform our economy in 10 years. They're living in a pie-in-the-sky sort of an idea, mainly because they're not well educated. To be frank, a lot of these people that believe that the world is going to end in 12 years, like AOC, are just plain stupid. They do not have any kind of an understanding of how the world works, how energy works, how energy distribution works, the physics of moving things, and how much energy it takes. People have this belief that on the environmental side that solar power and wind power is going to do it. It's going to save everything. Well, it can't, because power doesn't get generated when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. You still need backup power systems. You still need to have coal plants and natural gas and oil-fired plants running at nighttime or when the wind's not blowing. To get to this 100% renewable Holy Grail is just physically impossible. To quote Star Trek, Scotty, you cannot change the laws of physics, and it's not going to happen here.
About 5 years ago, I started... Well, first of all, my background comes from the Bakken, so I kind of had that with North Dakota, and we had a public smoking ban on the state referendum, and I want to say 2012. And that was a big issue. It had to do with a lot of, personal rights versus this and that. But of course, in the end, the narrative of public health and a kind of a dirty and a shame type of a thing won out. And whether you're for smoking or against smoking, doesn't really matter. That's how it played out. I see the same template happening, in my opinion. It's very much like how states used a smoking ban and used kind of the way that they changed the narrative of the cigarette industry to be more of a dirty and unhealthy, and using children and dirtiness and health concerns, that sort of thing. I'd like to know your opinion on my observations of how they've kind of, the narrative against fossil fuels has changed to where it almost seems like it's in the same level as cigarettes are. Actually, I don't hear any presidential candidates trying to ban cigarettes, but I hear half a dozen of them trying to ban fossil fuels.
Well, you're right when there's a comparison to the smoking issue. And the reason there is because they were successful in the 90s at getting, smoking exposed for the health issue that it really was. And they exposed the fact that cigarette companies did, in fact, enhance nicotine to increase addiction and things like this. And they suppressed the issues related to health and their own studies internally as well as what went out to the public. And so, smoking got caught, and it was dirty, and there's no two ways about it. My parents died of smoking-related illnesses, so I understand this. So, yes, they're trying to use that same template on climate and energy and so forth. And the reason behind that is that when they finally exposed the smoking industry in the 90s, there was a humongous settlement, huge amounts of money. And the same thing has been tried here in a trial that's been going on in New York City recently with ExxonMobil. There's this Exxon New thing that brought up by Bill McKibben and the McKibbenites on 350.org that, Exxon knew how dangerous it was to, use oil and gas back in the 60s. And here's the documents that proved it because Exxon had done some internal studies. Well, the fact of the matter is Exxon was just simply distributing the known scientific analysis that was available at the time, and they didn't try to hide anything. But the fact of the matter is that the climate alarm industry is going after ExxonMobil and other companies, trying to make it such that there's a harm type of a finding, and they haven't been able to tie it. They have not been able to show that the use of fossil fuels is actually causing harm, because there's lots of benefits to fossil fuels that offsets any potential harm, and they've not been able to prove it in court so far. And as a matter of fact, the court case last week, if you follow a website called Climate Litigation Watch, it has been run by Chris Horner, an attorney who's been chasing these issues. You can see that the judge is not having it. He's throwing a lot of these arguments out because they don't have any merit. And so they're down to basically one argument, and it's become a big accounting issue trying to account for the fact that fossil fuels could cause harm, and they're not being able to prove it so far. So the bottom line is they're chasing money, just like any other rent-seeker organization out there.
Heartland, talk to me about what you guys have going on right now. You guys got podcasts, don't you?
Yes, we run a podcast, the Heartland Daily Podcast. We talk to people all over the world, scientists, attorneys, industrialists, politicians, people that run NGOs and so forth. We do this every day. And so the Heartland Daily Podcast is available at heartland.org, and I advise people to tune it in if they've got an opportunity.
We have a few of your guests on in the past, so I appreciate you coming on here. But when it comes to the environment and energy, what's kind of a final thought that you'd like people to walk away from this interview knowing?
Well, having a cleaner environment is always a good thing, and certainly we've made tremendous environmental gains in the United States and in the world since the environmental movement started in the early 1970s. We have cleaner air. Los Angeles is a perfect example. These are good things. But what's happened is that once those problems had been solved, the environmental industry didn't have anything else to solve, and so they decided that climate was going to be the next big thing. The bottom line is, though, is that climate is not something that can be easily solved by humans. There's lots of other factors and forcings and so forth that make up what our climate is. And our contribution to it, while there is some, is very minuscule compared to some of the other forces that are driving the climate of the planet. And so these environmentalists, for the want of having something to do to make themselves feel good, are chasing a pie-in-the-sky dream that's not going to pay